Good evening, everyone. Guys, am I audible? Yeah, thank you. So, the last session, we were discussing with scanning phase. So, once a hacker finds out the details through footprinting phase, the second step that a hacker would go through is something called scanning. In scanning, there are again different objectives for a hacker. So, the primary objective is to identify the live IP addresses, right? So to see how many IP addresses are available in a network, right? So that's the first thing that a hacker has to check. And for that, we have used some applications called IP scanners. So using IP scanners, we were able to see how many IP addresses are live in a given range, right? And then we have checked with something called port scanners, right? But we were not able to complete that. So what we have done so far is IP scanners, right? And this IP scanners will show us live IP addresses, right? So IP scanners will show us the live IP addresses in the given range. So this is the first objective. And the second objective is to find running services. Right. So the second objective is to identify the running services on the target system, or maybe if there are multiple IP addresses, try to see what all running services are available on each and every server. Right. Now the thing is, when you speak about these running services, to identify running services, we were discussing about identifying the open ports. So we have to check what all open ports are available to identify the running services. And for this, we are using port scanning tools. Right? We were using port scanning tools. And yesterday I was saying, when we use this port scanning tools, they are only showing you ports which communicate with the TCP connections. They are not showing us the ports which communicate with the UDP. Right. So for UDP communication, whatever ports are being used, so those are not being displayed, right? Only the TCP ports were being displayed in the port scanning tools, like advanced port scanner, what we have used earlier, right? Now to overcome this issue, what hackers are doing is, instead of just going with a simple application like advanced port scanner, right? Hackers are using a different tool called Nmap, right? So hackers are using a different tool called Nmap. So what happens with the Nmap application is you have different kind of scanning procedures here in the Nmap, right? So to perform open port scanning, which shows you TCP as well as the UDP ports, as I said, hackers are using Nmap, right? Now, Nmap is a open source tool, right? So this is open source application available for Linux as well as Windows platform. Basically, Nmap is a command line application. So you type the command, right, with all the required options that you have selected. Nmap will perform the scan according to what all options you have chosen and then show you the result. Uh, but let us say if you are not very comfortable with the command line interface, there's a tool which will be installed along with Nmap called ZenMap. Right? So ZenMap is a tool which will be installed along with Nmap. This is going to be a GUI, a graphical interface, right? So you can either use Nmap or ZenMap. The options what you're going to use are all the same, right? And it shows you the results. So here you will be able to choose both the TCP as well as the UDP ports, right? And there's one more advantage also when you're using Nmap. Now, say for example, say you are a hacker somewhere on internet and you are trying to perform scan against a network, right? You're trying to perform scan against the network. Now, let us say there is a internet gateway device which is configured in such a way that it has to deny all ICMP traffic. There's a internet gateway device on that organization's network which is configured to deny all the ICMP traffic. So tell me, if all ICMP traffic is blocked, as a hacker, will you be able to see live IP addresses? So that would not be possible because your IP scanning tools are working based on ping, right? And if ICMP is blocked, your ping command would not give you with any response, right? If ICMP is blocked, not only your IP scanners, even your port scanners would not work because they are also working based on the same concept. They first try to ping the given IP addresses, right? And then based on what all IP addresses are available, it tries to identify the open ports, right? So here what Nmap does, it gives us with an additional option called TCP SYN scan. Now, before you understand TCP SYN scan, let's say a client has to establish a communication to a server. Client has to establish a communication with the server. So, how exactly would it go through this TCP communication? How exactly would it establish the TCP connection? So guys, what is the procedure for this client to establish TCP communication to the server? No, not port scanner. To establish TCP connection to a server, what is the procedure? I'm sure you all have discussed this in your CCNA. So client has to send a synchronized message to the server. You write it as SYN, right? Server responds back to you with a synchronized acknowledge. We call it as SYNAC. And then client has to respond to the server with acknowledge or ACK, right? So this is what you call as TCP three-way handshake. Do you recollect now? Now, hello packets are in your routing. Uh, so it's not here with the TCP connections. So you call this as TCP three-way handshake. So do you guys recollect it? So here when you speak about the three-way handshake, hackers are using these messages, the TCP messages, to see if IP address is available or not, and if a port is open or closed. So what they do, they try to send, say, a TCP SYN message to a server. Now let's say, uh, for example, the server has IP address something like, say, 192.168.137.220 on port number 80. Now assume you got a TCP SYNAC, you got a TCP SYNAC from 192.168.137.220 and port 80. So you have sent a SYN message and you have received a SYNAC. So what does it mean? Is a IP address available or not? Guys, what about others? So when you send a TCP SYN message and you are receiving a TCP SYNAC, what exactly does it mean? So if you are sending a TCP SYN and you receive a TCP SYNAC, it means this IP address is available and this port, whatever you are trying to check, is also available. The port is open. Only then you get a SYNAC, right? But let us say you haven't got a TCP SYNAC, but what you got is a TCP reset. What you got is a TCP reset from 137.220. So what does it mean? So what you have got is a TCP reset. So you got a TCP reset, it means this IP address is available, but the port 80, whatever you are trying to check, is not open, that's closed. Right. So now can we say, based on this TCP SYN verifications, can we identify if a IP address is available or not and if a port is open or closed in a network? Even though ICMP is blocked, right? By using this TCP SYN messages, we will be able to see if our IP address is available or not, right? And if a port is open or not, right? So hackers are actually trying to do this. So hackers, they get information through footprinting. Once information is obtained via footprinting, the next step, they're trying to identify this live IPs. After identifying live IPs, they are trying to check for open ports. And at this stage, if they find any difficulties because the ICMP has been blocked and all this, then hackers go with TCP SYN scan. So let us install Nmap and see how exactly we perform this scanning. So here I'm installing this Nmap application. So when you are installing Nmap, as you see, along with Nmap, you'll also have another package called npcap that will be installed, right? So no need to make any additional configuration changes and all, right? Just continue with installation of npcap, and then you will continue with the nmap installation. So this npcap is a required driver for your nmap to function properly. So that will be installed along with nmap installation. So as I said, once you are using this, once you install nmap, you get a package called zenmap. So this is what it is. So in zenmap, as I said, this is a GUI for nmap application. You have both the options. You can use the command line, type the command manually and try to initiate a scan, or you can also go with the GUI based options where you choose what all things should be done, right? Instead of typing the commands. So I'll show you both, right? So in Windows, when we are doing it now, I'll show you how exactly you do it with the command line version, and then I'll also show you the in Windows I'll show you the GUI version through user interface, and then in Linux when we do it I'll show you with the command line version. So I'm selecting a new profile or a command, and in the profile editor we have to give the targets under scan options. So here you can scan the entire network range, means you can scan the entire subnet or maybe a range of IP addresses, or you can do a very specific IP address, right? So let me say I'm searching for a very specific IP. So it's up to you based on your requirement, the entire subnet or a specific range of IP addresses or only one IP, right? And then coming into the TCP scan options, I will select the option TCP SYN scan, right? Because that's what we have to do when ICMP is blocked, right? So we go with TCP SYN scan. And for non-TCP scans, we use UDP scan, right? I'm using UDP scan, right? And the timing template, if you are doing it, if you are performing this scan within the local network, you can go with T4. If you are performing this scan over internet, go with T0, right? So here I am doing it as an internal audit, so T4 is okay, right? But if you are doing it somewhere on internet, means you are in a different location and you are trying to perform an external audit, then go with T0, right? So once you have chosen all the options, click on scan. Now this application will try to scan that system or the IP address, whatever you have chosen, show you what all open ports are available. So this is going to take some time, so we'll have to wait for the application to complete the scanning and give us a result. So once the scan is complete, so here in this section, we should be seeing the IP address of the system, whatever we have scanned, right? So let us wait for the result. And TCP scan will always be slow compared to uh, the ICMP, the ping based scan. Okay, so the application has found some open ports. So we'll wait for it to complete the scan. So as you see, the TCP scan would take a long time. So as a hacker, if you are trying to do this TCP based scan, right, you should be prepared to wait for a long time. Okay, so finally you have the results. So when you click on the open ports, you will be able to see a list of all the open ports that are available on that particular system, right? So gives you a list of all TCP ports and also the UDP ports. So it tells you what all TCP ports are open and also what all UDP ports are available there, right? So this is how you can use this Nmap application. So is it clear? So what would be the next objective of a hacker after performing this port scan? So as a hacker, right, as I said, the first objective is to identify live IPs, that is what all IP addresses are available in a network. Then we have seen running services, which shows us what all services are available there, right? So this is again based on open ports. And the next step, after identifying what all open ports are available, hackers have to identify if there are any vulnerabilities, right? Hackers have to identify if there are any vulnerabilities on the remote server. If there are some vulnerabilities, then based on the vulnerabilities, hacker can try to launch an attack and compromise the system. But let's say there are no vulnerabilities, then it would not be possible to launch any attack, right? So the next step after identifying the open ports is to identify what all vulnerabilities are available, right? So for this, I'll show you two different applications, right? Um, let's go to Kali. So in Kali, as we have just done this port scan using Nmap through GUI, let us do port scan using Kali Linux, right? And here no GUI, you have to do it based on the command line, right? So let me say sudo nmap hyphen sv hyphen ss. So I'm saying try to perform a TCP based port scan on say port number 21. Also try to identify what is the application that is installed, what is the version, what is the name of the application and all on this IP 192.168, say 137.200, right? I'm trying to perform Nmap scan, right? A TCP SYN based Nmap scan on 137.200 IP address. So when you use a command sudo, it will ask you to give your user ID and password. So I give the password. Now, as you see, it tells you that it is starting the Nmap scan and it would take some time. So we'll have to wait for the result. So let us see what kind of what kind of applications will be found on the remote system. Okay, so here as you see, it says on port number 21, there is FTP service running on the server. The application is VSFTPD 2.3.4. So it tells us what is the application name and also what is the version that is installed, which version of uh, application is installed on the remote server or on the remote computer, right? Now the thing is, for this particular application, right, it is also saying anonymous logins are allowed. So what do we mean by anonymous login? So generally when you are accessing FTP, right, should you authenticate or can you access the content without any authentications? So if you try to access FTP and you have to authenticate, right, that's a general behavior. But you can also configure the server to display all the contents and all without any kind of authentication, right? So without authentication, the contents of your FTP can be accessed directly, right? But here it says this anonymous login is possible, right? So let us see how do we exploit this weakness, right? So this weakness, this is a vulnerability. Now we will see how exactly this weakness or this vulnerability can be exploited, right? So how do we launch an attack to take advantage of this weakness? So for this, again, I have to use another command line based application in Kali Linux, which is called Metasploit framework, right? So the Metasploit framework will help you to launch attacks and test if your applications are secure or not, right? So to access the Metasploit framework, you give a command msf console. So the command is msf console. So this would start the Metasploit framework console. Okay, so now you have the msf console here. So once you have the Metasploit framework console, now let us see if Metasploit framework has some attack method related to that FTP server, right? So let me say search for VSFTPD. VSFTPD was the FTP application we found on the remote machine. So let us see if we can find if there is any attack related to that particular software version in MSF console. So let us check that. Okay, so it says there is attack in the Metasploit framework, right? A backdoor attack. So let us see how exactly we can use this. So this is the exploit. So let me say use this particular exploit. So this is the entire path exploit Unix FTP VSFTPD 234 backdoor and all, right? So let us execute this. So I'm saying try to use this particular exploit. Okay, so once we tell the Metasploit framework what kind of an attack is to be done, the next step I have to set the remote host, right? Or what is the target mission IP address? So here I set the FTP server IP address saying 192.168.137.200. So that's the IP address of the remote server, the FTP server. So once the remote server IP address details have been set, then I say exploit. So now I'm telling the Metasploit framework to launch the attack. Now it says it's trying to target the remote server and it is using this user ID, right, as root, right? So it is trying to directly log into that FTP server as root, right? And here, as you see, one command shell session was opened, right? So session 1 has been opened. Now let us see with this particular session what can we do. So now let me say mm, I'll see what is the user account that I was uh, uh, granted. So let me check with this command, who am I? So it says that I am able to log in to that particular FTP server with root user. Okay, so let me check my present directory. Okay, so slash, let me see. Okay, so when I say ls, right, I'm able to view all the files and folders and all. So see, I'm able to execute every command here, right? I'm trying to execute every command and I'm able to get a response. So it's as if like I'm connected to that particular system itself. So there was a vulnerability, a vulnerable application on that server. And now using Metasploit, I'm able to launch an attack and gain root access. So I got root access or the administrator access on the server. And now I'm able to view all the files and folders. Okay. Okay. So as you see now, I'm able to navigate within the entire file structure. So is this clear? How a hacker would be able to launch an attack if there is a vulnerability on the server? Yeah, the IP address is 192.168.137.200. That's one FTP server in the network. Okay, so guys, is everyone clear with this? How a hacker can launch an attack on the server if there is a vulnerability? Okay. Yeah, Mr. Chandra, if you do not make any changes, like you don't change any files or all, right? Unless the administrator is looking into the connection logs, they will not be able to verify that someone has got connected to the server. Okay, so here we found a vulnerability on the FTP server and we were able to launch some attack, right? In the same way, you can also install a vulnerability scanning tool on your Windows machine and try to perform a vulnerability scan. So here I am installing an application, right, called Shadow Security Scanner. So this Shadow Security Scanner will scan for vulnerabilities on the target system's operating system and also the installed application, right? So here, uh, no need to use the command. You have a GUI. So here I'll try to scan this particular server. So 9168.137.220. Okay, so this is a server where I have some web page running, right? So I'll try to scan this particular server and see if I can find some vulnerabilities on this particular web page on the particular server, right? So if there are some vulnerabilities similar to what we found on the FTP server, we'll be able to launch an attack. So let us try to see how exactly these vulnerabilities can be found. So as we have already installed this application, Shadow Security Scanner, run this application as a administrator. Okay, so this application is not free, but you can use it for 15 days as a trial version, right? So let us start a new scanning session. And here you have different profiles, right? Like, do you want to go with a complete scan or only HTTP scanning or only FTP scanning, right? Or only the top 20 attacks and all, right? I'll say I'll go with a complete scan. So choose the profile. So in this case, I'm saying I'll go with a complete scan. In the next step, it is asking you to add the IP address. So here you will have to define the IP address of the remote system, whatever you wanted to scan. So I give the IP address of the remote system that I want to scan. Say next, and then start scanning. So now this vulnerability scanning tool, this will try to scan that remote machine, right? And tell us if there are any vulnerabilities available or not. So the first thing this application does, try to check if the basic communication is available or not. Try to see if the vulnerability scanner is able to communicate with the remote server. If it is able to communicate with the remote server, then it will continue with identifying open ports. Try to see what all open ports are present on the remote system. Once the open ports are identified, then it will try to identify the vulnerabilities. And this particular software, Shadow Security Scanner, what I have installed, this is going to check for 14,900 vulnerabilities on the remote system. So whatever IP address you are trying to scan, whatever the server you are trying to scan, so Shadow Security Scanner is going to check for 14,000 14,900 vulnerabilities on the remote system. So out of this 14,900 vulnerabilities, if any vulnerability is present, you will be able to identify this. And this number keeps going up, right? So whenever you get an update, the number of vulnerabilities in the applications database will keep on increasing. So similar to TCP scan, this vulnerability scanning will also take time. So it depends on how many services are available on the remote server, right? How many services are running there on the remote machine, how fast the server is responding to you, right? So how fast is the remote server responding to your queries? So various parameters come into picture on how long it's going to take for this vulnerability scanning to be complete. And before we see the list of vulnerabilities, so these vulnerabilities can be classified into high risk or critical risk, right? Medium risk and low risk vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities can be classified into high risk or critical risk, medium risk or low risk vulnerabilities. And each of this would be shown with a separate color. So critical or high risk vulnerabilities will always be shown in red color. Medium risk vulnerabilities will be shown in orange color. Low risk vulnerabilities will be shown in either green or blue color. So this varies from application to application. So some applications show it in green, some applications show it in blue. Okay, so is that color coding clear? High risk or critical risk vulnerabilities will be shown in red color. Medium risk vulnerabilities will be shown in orange. Low risk vulnerabilities will be shown either in green or blue, and that varies from application to application, but generally green or blue are the colors for low risk vulnerabilities. Now, what do we mean by medium risk, high risk, low risk, and all this? What if a hacker finds high risk vulnerability on the server? What does it mean? A high risk vulnerability on the server? So a high risk vulnerability is easy for a hacker to launch the attack, right? And if you speak about a medium risk vulnerability, it's not so easy, right? It's not so easy, or at the same time, it's not even impossible, right? But if you find a low risk vulnerability, yes, using a low risk vulnerability, you will not be able to launch an attack. So that's not possible. And just for us to easily identify what exactly is the risk factor of this vulnerability for the visual representation, they also shows in different colors high risk or critical risk vulnerabilities. So the ones which are very easy for a hacker to launch an attack and compromise the system, they'll be shown in red. Medium risk vulnerabilities, not so easy, but still attacks can be done and your server or your system can be compromised. So those will be shown in orange, and low risk ones will be shown in green or blue. So let us see this. Okay, so here application has found some medium risk vulnerabilities and also some high risk vulnerabilities, and the scan is still going on as we see, right? So here when you speak about this high risk vulnerabilities, so on this server as of now we see there are two high risk vulnerabilities. The first one is if someone connects to your IIS server, that is if someone is connecting to your web server with a WebDAV protocol and they issue a very lengthy search request, right? If they issue a very lengthy search request, then application will not be able to process that, right? That application would not be able to process it and it would stop. Now tell me, what happens if your web server application stops responding? If the if the web server application stops responding, what actually happens? Will someone be able to access your website? So if your web server application stops responding, no one can access your web page, right? No one will be able to access the web page. So this particular condition where end users are unable to access your websites, the condition where end users are unable to access your websites, right? That's because the server is not able to accept the request and process them. You call it as denial of service, right? So the server is unable to accept and process the request. You call it as denial of service, right? So that's one vulnerability which is on this mission. And the other vulnerability which was found is in relation to how exactly the URLs or how exactly the end user requests are being decoded. So on this mission, there's a vulnerability with how exactly the end user request would be decoded. So the application has a weakness. Application will is not able to properly decode the end user request. So if application is unable to decode end user request, what happens? So what happens if the application is unable to decode the end user request? It does not understand what is to be done. It cannot differentiate if this is a genuine request or it is a attack, right? So whatever the end user is passing on, like whatever commands the end user is passing on, your application would try to blindly execute it, right? So now let us see what actually a hacker can do if they find such a vulnerability. Now, when you are doing this particular attack, you can also see your vulnerability scanner has given you some scripts, right? It is giving you with some script. So let me just copy the script. Okay, so keep it here. So this is the script that's given in your application. So this particular script, if we understand this, it says try to create a HTTP request to 137.220. Of course, that's your web server IP. And then instead of requesting the web page, redirect yourself to the script folder and then execute this particular script dot dot percentage 255c dot dot percentage 255c winnt system32 cmd.exe. Now, what is this cmd.exe? So guys, what is cmd.exe? So cmd.exe is your command prompt, right? So there's a command prompt on the target server, right? So you are trying to access command prompt of the target server, and then you are trying to execute a command dirc. So generally what happens when you execute a command dirc, what should be the kind of output that we can expect? So when we execute a command dirc, should we be able to see all the files and folders in the C drive? So we should be able to see the content of C drive. So let us try to execute this script and see what actually would be the result. So let me do it from your Firefox. And here, as you see, when you are trying to execute this attack script on Firefox, it's not executing the attack, but instead it is downloading the command prompt, the cmd.exe, right? So you will not be able to execute this kind of attacks on any newer generation browsers. So what you have to do is use Internet Explorer, right? You'll have to use Internet Explorer to do this kind of attack, right? So now with Windows 11, you don't have dedicated Windows 11, right? But you can go to your Microsoft Edge browser. In the settings, you'll be able to search for Internet Explorer. Okay. So here I have the option to show me. Okay, so let me add the target server address here. Okay, so once I add the target server address, so any request going to this particular address will be executed as if it is being done through Internet Explorer, right? And here, let me also enable the option where uh, the websites can be run in Internet Explorer mode. So you have to go to settings, search for Internet Explorer, add the IP address or add the URL of the target system or the target website, and then enable the sites to be reloaded into Internet Explorer mode. So you have to select these two options and then give the script. So this particular option allows sites to be reloaded in Internet Explorer mode. You have to allow this. So when you say allow, it will ask you to restart your Edge browser. So do it. Okay. Looks like which browser is acting up. Okay. So generally this IP address itself should be sufficient, but maybe Edge browser is not taking it. So let me add the full script. Let me restart the browser. Okay. So now as you can see, once I execute this particular script, instead of showing me the web page, right? Instead of showing me the web page, it is now showing me the content of the C drive. Right. So should someone on internet be able to see what all files and folders are present on your server's hard drive? So no one should be able to view what all files and folders are present on your server's hard drive. But because of this particular vulnerability here, right, someone is able to execute a script and also see what all files and folders are present. Is this dangerous? Someone being able to view all the files and folders of your server's hard drive? So not only this, right? A hacker can also do much more. Now, do you recollect we were discussing about white hat and black hat hackers? So a white hat tries to identify the vulnerability and then helps you to fix it. A black hat identify the vulnerability and then tries to compromise the server. So if you are a white hat hacker, when you submit the report of all the vulnerabilities found, attach a screenshot of this, which is like a proof that there is a vulnerability and that can be exploited. But if you are a black hat, you will go ahead and try to launch the attack. So let me show you how exactly that would be done. So we have already executed this first script, right, where you'll be able to see the contents of the C drive. Let us execute the second script. So the second script is trying to copy this cmd.exe into a file called inventor.exe. Right, it's trying to copy this cmd.exe into a file called inventor.exe. But before we execute it, do you see any file inventor.exe on this C drive? So do you see any file inventor.exe on the C drive as of now? We don't see it, right? Let us try to execute this script. Now see, it is giving you some response. And what is the response? CGI error. So are we successful with the attack? No, right? It is showing us there is an error. So we are not successful with the attack, right? But see this. still says one file has been copied, right? So let us go back to the previous request and just try to refresh the page. Now see here, there is a new file created called inventor.exe, which was not available earlier, right? So this inventor.exe, what exactly is it? So this is nothing but a copy of command prompt, right? A copy of cmd.exe, right? So now let us execute the final script where a hacker would try to change the contents of the web page, right? So here hacker is trying to put up a message, right? So hacker is now trying to keep a message here which says this particular web page or this particular site has been hacked. So what was the original content? It says welcome to the cybersecurity professional and all. So that was the original content. Now that content is being replaced by something else, like this site has been hacked, right? So let us execute it, and this time, as you see, there is only a CGA error, but there is no confirmation that something has been changed or something has been updated. Right. So there's no message that something has been changed or updated. So let us just go back and try to refresh. We'll see. Now, as you can see, here it is showing us a message that this particular page has been compromised. This has been hacked. Okay. So there was a vulnerability found, right? And based on this particular vulnerability, a hacker is trying to launch an attack and compromise the system. So is that clear? Okay. So if there was no vulnerability on the remote server, would this attack be successful? So if there was no vulnerability, will this attack be successful? No. So if vulnerability was not there, right, a hacker would not have been successful with doing this kind of attack, right? So hacker is successful in launching this attack and compromising the system only because there was a vulnerability, there's a weakness on the server. It is unable to properly understand the end user's request, right? And it is blindly executing whatever commands that end users are sending there. So if this vulnerability was not available, hacker would not be successful in compromising this server. Okay, so is this clear, everyone? So we have seen like how a hacker can try to perform port scan, try to identify open ports, right? Even if say there is a gateway which is denying all the ICMP traffic and all, right? We have seen how exactly it can be done. And then we have also seen if there is a vulnerability found on the remote server, how these hackers can try to compromise the remote server based on that vulnerability, right? So what we have seen, the two attacks today, right, is like how exactly this attacks can be done based on vulnerabilities on your applications. So there was a vulnerability on the FTP server application. We have seen how to do the attack. There was a vulnerability found on the IIS application, the web server application. We have seen how exactly this attack is done, right? So we will also be seeing how hackers will be doing attacks against your websites. So today, if you see, majority of us, right, we're all using web applications, right? So on web applications, you'll again see different sort of vulnerabilities, right? So we'll also be discussing what sort of different vulnerabilities you will see on web applications and how we can launch the attacks, right? So we'll also discuss different kind of attacks on the web applications. So is everyone clear so far? Any queries? And have you all given your details so that I can share the VMs, or did someone miss? In case someone has missed giving the details, here is the link. So whatever details you give here, right? So the same form will be accessed by US Council. So they'll be giving you with the examination voucher on the same email ID, whatever you are going to give here in this link here, right? So make sure that whatever email ID you are giving, you have access to it, right? Yeah, in the job status, if you are already working somewhere, you can give the details, like what is your job role and all, right? But in case say you're searching for jobs and all, you can give it as a student or a fresher. Yeah. Okay. So with this, I'll be ending the session for today. So in the next session, we'll see with more attacks, right? More attacks on different web server applications and all. Okay. Thank you all.